Okay, let's unpack this. We're living in an age where artificial intelligence, well, it seems to be everywhere, doesn't it? In every headline, every conversation, from the smart assistant in your phone to these complex algorithms predicting what you'll buy next, it often feels like we're just scratching the surface, of what it all truly means. What is AI really capable of? Where are its fundamental limits? And maybe more importantly, what does its rise tell us about ourselves? Today, we're taking a deep dive into the profound insights of a scholar who has spent, get this, over 50 years grappling with these very questions, Professor Brian Cantwell Smith. And his work isn't just abstract theory, it's a really critical lens for understanding the practical realities of AI in our world right now.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating here, I think, is Brian Cantwell Smith's truly interdisciplinary background. He's not just an AI expert, and that's kind of the key point. He holds professorships across fields like information science, philosophy, cognitive science, and the history and philosophy of science and technology. It's quite a range. This unique breadth allows him to bridge what he sees as a critical, frankly, gaping chasm in the current AI debate.
And it's a chasm we desperately need to bridge, right? Brian paints this vivid, almost comical caricature of how we're currently talking about AI. Picture this. On one side, you have the technical experts, people like, say, Nick Bostrom, Ray Kurzweil, or Max Tegmark. Brilliant minds, no question. They have this deep, sophisticated understanding of the technology itself, how the algorithms work, the computational power, the sheer mechanics of it all. But as Brian quite pointedly puts it, their grasp of the human condition, our ethics, our messy, rich inner lives, well, it's a millimeter deep. They might build these incredible systems, but maybe without a full appreciation for the nuances of human experience or the ethical frameworks that govern our societies.
Right. And if that's one side, what's on the other? Well, then you find the humanists, philosophers perhaps, thinkers like Kant or maybe MacIntyre. These people possess a profound, centuries-deep understanding of humanity, its complexities, its moral landscape, its rich inner life, what it means to be a person. That's their domain. But their grasp of the underlying technology, Brian argues, is also a millimeter deep.
Mm-hmm.
They might debate the ethical implications of AI for hours, which is absolutely vital, don't get me wrong, but often without a real sense of what the technology actually does or can do at a fundamental level. It's a bit like discussing the societal impact of flight without understanding aerodynamics. You're missing a key piece.
Yeah, exactly. So if you were to plot this on a graph, right, deep tech understanding on one axis, deep human understanding on the other, both ends of the current debate are kind of stuck along the edges. And what's missing, he laments, is that upper right quadrant, that top right corner where both profound technological insight and deep humanistic understanding genuinely meet. That's the void he's trying to fill.
Precisely. Brian argues that what's sorely missing is a truly serious, integrated debate. One that combines deep technological understanding with a profound grasp of the human condition. His book, The Promise of Artificial Intelligence, Reckoning and Judgment, is a direct attempt to articulate thoughts from that crucial missing perspective. And he frames this not as a simple people versus machines conflict, which he thinks leads to madness, frankly. Because neither human intelligence nor AI is static, right? Human intelligence itself isn't going to stay put. It's evolving, and so is AI. So we need a comprehensive, non-circular map of intelligence, something that can assess both human and AI capabilities as they evolve, rather than just pitting them against each other in some zero-sum game. Or worse, succumbing to the myth that AI will eventually just become human.
Okay, so our mission for you today is to explore Brian Cantwell Smith's groundbreaking ideas, what AI is, what it isn't, and crucially, why understanding these distinctions is so important for all of us navigating this rapidly changing world. It's really about moving beyond the hype and truly grasping the practical implications for our lives. We'll explore his core concepts, delve into his unique view of reality, which is surprisingly counterintuitive, actually, and then connect it all. Connected to some incredibly practical, real-world implications that affect everything from how we design ethical AI systems to how we educate ourselves and even how we navigate our daily lives. The foundational divide. Reckoning versus judgment. Okay, so at the heart of Brian Cantwell Smith's framework lies this fundamental distinction. Two types of intelligence, reckoning and judgment. Let's start with reckoning. What exactly does he mean by this? When we hear about AI making decisions or analyzing data, is that reckoning?
Absolutely. That's exactly it. Reckoning, in Brian's terms, refers to the manipulation of representations and data about the world by systems that are not themselves responsible for the relationship between those representations and what they're actually about. Think of it as pure, brilliant information processing. Computers excel at this, obviously. Examples include what he calls good old-fashioned AI or GOFAI, the early stuff based on formal logic and rules. database programs, simulations, and yes, indeed, all of what we call second-wave AI. That includes deep learning, those powerful neural networks used for image recognition, for instance, and machine learning. These systems operate within their internal imagination, if you will, processing data, identifying patterns, making predictions, but without a genuine understanding or accountability for what that data refers to in the real world, they don't have to hold those representations to account.
Okay, so if I'm hearing this right, reckoning is like a master accountant, brilliant with numbers, perfectly balancing the books, but maybe doesn't truly understand the impact of those financial figures on a person's livelihood or the larger economy. Is that the idea? And he uses a really impactful analogy to illustrate this distinction, doesn't he? The babysitter example. That really brought the concept home for me.
Yes, it's a truly compelling one. It immediately makes the abstract concept of reckoning very concrete. So imagine you hire a babysitter for your 2-year-old. Maybe you've decided to drive hundreds of miles to attend a fascinating deep dive like this one. You give them a meticulously detailed list of instructions for caring for your child over the weekend. Feed them at 6 p.m., read the specific book at 7 p.m., put them to bed by 8 p.m. Don't ever hand the baby to a strange man. Very clear rules. You go away for the weekend, and when you return, the babysitter says, I don't know where your child is, but I did everything you told me to do. Brian's response, that's not good enough. This system, this babysitter, followed the rules perfectly, processed the instructions without error, pure reckoning. But it couldn't adapt or take responsibility beyond those explicit instructions when the truly unexpected happened. It only reckoned based on its internal data, its explicit rules.
Wow, okay, that immediately clarifies it. So, if reckoning is about following rules and processing data without that deeper responsibility to the real world, what then is judgment? How does it fundamentally differ, and why is it so much more than just following instructions, however complex?
Judgment is the profound contrast. And for Brian, it's an ideal normative standard, something we as humans should aspire to. He describes it as dispassionate, deliberative thought. And by dispassionate, he doesn't mean emotionless, not at all. He means impartial, not swayed or torqued by your own mishgas, as he puts it, your personal biases, your emotional baggage, your preconceived notions. It's thought grounded in ethical commitment, responsible action, and an essential accountability to the world, not just to a rigid set of rules or internal data.
That makes so much sense. So it's about being accountable to reality itself, not just to a program or a model. It implies a deeper connection.
Precisely. The core of judgment is knowing the difference between appearance and reality, between the representations one uses, the models one builds in one's head, and the actual things in the world those representations refer to. It requires a deep commitment to the world's existence and a deference to the world, a willingness to be wrong, essentially. Brian's fundamental axiom of science captures this perfectly. When word and world part company, the world wins. You change your ideas, your models, your words to match the world, not the other way around. It's a profound humility to the way things actually are, and an ethical commitment to truth that underpins all genuine understanding.
In bringing it back to that babysitter example, how does judgment play out there? Because that's where the rubber really meets the road, isn't it? Where the difference between a merely competent babysitter and a truly responsible one becomes crystal clear.
Right. Revisiting the babysitter example. A babysitter with good judgment understands that if the apartment building catches fire and a fireman yells to hand the child out the window, the explicit rule, don't hand the baby to a strange man, is immediately overridden by the deeper commitment to the child's safety and well-being. To reality. There's nothing you can say, no exhaustive list of criteria, no set of if-then statements that can guarantee good judgment, because it requires navigating unforeseen, ethically complex circumstances with a profound sense of what truly matters in the world. Brian also likens it to being in a relationship, being committed to you, the real, evolving person, not just their fixed image of you. That requires constantly updating their understanding based on reality, which is why he argues no current computer system knows what it's talking about. It's always about that deference to the world, that commitment to reality over mere internal representations. And this has enormous practical implications, as we'll definitely get into.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit unsettling, especially with all the hype around AI these days. Brian Cantwell Smith makes a very stark claim about all current and even proposed future AI systems.
He does. Despite the enormous power of deep learning, those convolutional neural networks so good at image recognition or reinforcement learning, which allows AI to learn by trial and error, which he fully acknowledges are incredibly important and are transforming the human condition, perhaps even more than many humanists believe. Despite all that, Brian firmly states that none of these systems, nor anything currently proposed for third-wave AI-like causal models, those are the ones trying to understand cause and effect, being worked on by figures like Josh Tenenbaum, or context-aware systems promoted by DARPA, none of them, he argues, will ever lead to judgment. They remain fundamentally reckoning systems, period. This, as he puts it, is really the tough lesson of his work. It implies a fundamental inherent limitation to what even the most advanced AI can achieve. In terms of human-like understanding and responsibility, that is, it's a bold claim given the breathless predictions we often hear. They can process, they can predict, brilliantly even, but they cannot truly care or be accountable to the world in the way humans with judgment can. 2. Unpacking the world. Ontology and AI's surprising success.
So if current AI is limited to this reckoning mode, how did we even get here? And maybe more intriguingly, what does the very success of modern AI tell us about the world itself? Brian takes us back in time, challenging some fundamental assumptions that underpinned early AI. It sounds a bit like a philosophical detective story, uncovering hidden truths about reality.
It absolutely is. He calls early AI GOFAI, which you mentioned, short for good old-fashioned AI, a term coined by John Hogland. GOFAI was based on formal logic. It operated through deep, serial, multi-step inferences, using relatively modest amounts of information and strongly correlated variables. Think of the classic Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal syllogism, that kind of reasoning. This whole approach fundamentally assumed a world of discrete, clear, and unambiguous objects, a world that could be neatly parceled into logical statements. It was a very, you might say, Cartesian assumption about how the world works, that everything could be broken down into clear, distinct parts.
And to really test this, they even designed the world to fit the AI's assumptions, didn't they? That's quite telling. It sounds almost like building a movie set for your star actor, rather than letting the actor perform out in the messy real world.
That's a great analogy. A classic example is the mobile robot Shaky from SRI back in the 1980s. Brian highlights how the world for Shaky was literally built to conform to this assumption. Simple, empty rooms with a few clearly defined, block-like objects. They essentially projected their idea of the world onto the world itself. He calls this a profound humility lesson in AI. Early AI assumed the world was easily describable, neatly categorized, rather than encountering the world as it truly is in all its messy, complex glory. This fundamental misassumption, he argues, is why GOFAI ultimately didn't work out in realistic, messy environments. It just couldn't cope. It couldn't deal with the complexity of the real world, only the simplified, predefined world it was given. The practical lesson here is stark. Our models of the world aren't always accurate, and when they aren't, well, the world wins. Every time.
But then came deep learning, and it was a complete game changer. It seemed to leap past these limitations somehow. What did it get right that GOFAI missed? And more importantly, what does that tell us about the world itself, its fundamental nature, its ontological structure, as he calls it?
Well, deep learning operates on principles that are almost diametrically opposed to GOFAI. It uses shallow inference, massively parallel processing, enormous amounts of data, and critically, a very large number of weakly correlated variables. That's key. Brian argues that this design is powerful precisely because it aligns with the messy and intricate nature of reality. Its ontological structure, meaning the fundamental way things exist and relate to each other in the world. It doesn't try to force the world into neat, discrete categories like GOFAI did. Instead, it leverages the vast, intricate patterns within the raw data, patterns that humans often abstract away just to make sense of things. He even quips about his own past writing, saying that describing deep learning structure with simple nodes and lines often provides retrospective clarity, meaning it's only really clear to those who already understand it. The real insight comes from understanding why this particular architecture works so well in dealing with the world's inherent complexity.
So it's not about neat, isolated categories, but about a deeper, more intricate reality. A continuous interwoven fabric, almost. He has a brilliant analogy for this too, doesn't he? Something involving islands and what lies beneath them.
He does, a beautiful analogy. The Georgian Bay Islands in Canada are human concepts, he suggests, are like the visible islands. They appear as distinct entities above the waterline, a chair, a person, a tree, clear categories. But below the surface, there's an incredibly variegated, interconnected submarine structure of rock. It's all connected down there in complex ways. Deep learning, he argues, hangs on to the submarine detail. It doesn't just see the islands, it sees the whole underwater landscape. It's capable of navigating and responding to this underlying underlying complexity, which are high-level concepts typically abstract away just to make the world manageable for human cognition and language. It's as if deep learning perceives this entire submerged landscape, all those millions of subtle connections, not just the isolated islands we can easily name.
That's a really powerful image. Can you give us a tangible example of this submarine detail at work? Something we might have experienced ourselves without realizing it.
Yeah, a really good tangible example is Google Translate's transformation around 2017 or 2018. Remember when it suddenly got much, much better? It quietly switched from a rule-based system, which was essentially a very complex GOFAI system, to a deep learning algorithm. Brian attributes this massive improvement to the system leveraging millions upon millions of weak connections between words. These are the submarine interconnections in language that aren't explicitly articulated in grammar rules, but somehow render things sensible. They aren't strong, logical rules like subject, verb, object. They're subtle, almost ineffable relationships that are crucial for understanding the nuances of language. This hints at the incredible complexity underlying even common language. This system wasn't understanding meaning in a human sense, let's be clear, but it was incredibly effective at processing these deep, hidden patterns that a rule-based system couldn't even perceive. The practical relevance here is that even language, something we think we understand pretty well, is far more complex at a foundational level than we usually realize.
So what does this all mean for how we understand reality and even our own perception?
Yeah.
It sounds like it really challenges our basic intuitions about how we see the world and how our brains actually work.
Oh, absolutely. Brian emphasizes that human perception is an incredibly complex device, honed over, 500 million years of evolution? When we look at an image like a seemingly ordinary empty room with two people in it, our brain, with its estimated 100 billion elements and 100 trillion interconnections processes that raw light input into an intelligible scene, almost instantly. What arises in our consciousness isn't the raw, messy data hitting our retinas. It's a processed interpretation already categorized and made coherent. He cites an artist friend, Adam Lowe, who actually tries to paint what the world looks like before our brains process it. He calls it an F-1 conception of the scene. And apparently, it's a mess, a chaotic field that our minds then render intelligible. This demonstrates that perception itself involves a huge amount of intelligence that we normally just take for granted. We're constantly performing these acts of classification without even realizing it.
This sounds like it's shaking up some pretty fundamental philosophical ideas about reality and how we perceive it. It's not just seeing is believing, but maybe processing is believing.
It absolutely does. This leads directly to Brian's core ontological claim. The world itself is incomparably rich, vastly more than can be captured in words, and stupefyingly rich and complicated. He challenges the simplistic views of naive realism, the idea that the world is just as we perceive it, and any messiness is merely our uncertainty about clear objects. And he also challenges pure constructivism, the idea that all objects are simply human constructs with no independent existence outside our minds. Instead, he argues that the messiness of data that deep learning thrives on actually reflects the world's inherent fine-grained complexity, not just our uncertainty about supposedly clear-cut objects. He suggests that the success of second-wave AI, of deep learning, gives us indirect but compelling evidence about the nature of the world, particularly its underlying ontological structure. The fact that these deep learning systems excel at navigating this mess tells us something profound about what's actually out there, beyond our simplified human categories.
Can you give us some more compelling, everyday examples of this messiness in the world, beyond just visual images, examples that we might just overlook, because this really redefines how we think about common sense?
Yeah, use some great ones. Think about how many clouds are there? The plural seems warranted, right? There's more than one. But a precise number, it isn't discernible or even relevant. Try to count them, it's a ridiculous task. Or the, as he says, fatuousness of asking, is it the same fog that was here yesterday? Fog is a continuous phenomenon, not discrete packets you can track. Or consider the idea that a baby recognizing mommy might initially be responding to a feature or a whole constellation of constantly shifting cues, smell, sound, warmth, rather than a single, stable, discrete object we label mommy. And perhaps most revealing, chairness, he notes. Is that an intrinsic property of an object? He argues no. It emerges from affordances, what the object allows for, like sitting plus context and use. A sturdy rock can be a chair if you sit on it. A piece of modern art designed to be sat on is a chair. These ideas profoundly shift how we think about what's out there and how we relate to it. We move beyond the classical view's limitations and see that the world itself is far more intricate and dynamic than our tidy concepts often allow for. And this has practical implications for everything from how we design things to how we teach and how we interpret the world around us. 3. The human imperative. Responsibility, ethics, and the future.
Okay, so given that AI systems operate fundamentally in this reckoning mode, lacking judgment. Brian Cantwell Smith makes some very sobering and, I think, crucial points about ethics and our responsibility. This is where his work moves from maybe abstract philosophy to incredibly urgent real-world concerns, isn't it?
Absolutely. He stresses that because AI systems lack judgment and that commitment to the world, that deferential understanding of reality, they cannot be ethical or unethical in themselves. They simply lack the capacity. They don't give a damn, as he puts it quite bluntly, because they literally have no capacity for care or responsibility. They're just following programmed instructions or learned patterns. They cannot shoulder responsibility for the data they process, the training sets they learn from, which might be biased, or the real-world implications of their actions. This means the enormous and often overlooked burden of responsibility falls entirely on us, the humans who build, deploy, and profit from them. Brian argues that if we build and use such systems, we have to shoulder all the deference to the world that is relevant to their data and use. The system itself is merely a tool. The moral agency remains entirely with the human creators and users.
So the ethical buck always stops with us, never the AI. That has huge immediate implications for things we encounter every day, right? From the biases we see creeping into AI systems to how information itself is categorized.
Absolutely. This applies to everything. From the underlying registration schemes and databases, think about how categories like sex or gender are defined, for example. Are those definitions ethically compatible with a system's intended purpose? If you're building a system to identify gender for targeted advertising versus one for, say, medical diagnoses, the underlying data scheme and its ethical implications are vastly different. One size doesn't fit all. It also applies crucially to acknowledging inherent biases in training data, which often reflect existing societal prejudices. Garbage in, garbage out, ethically speaking. Brian explicitly states he's not at all convinced that data mining is ethical. Why? Because he's unsure if anyone truly stands up to take responsibility for the ethical compatibility of the underlying data schemes across all the varied and often unforeseen purposes a system might eventually be deployed for. Without that human responsibility and judgment overseeing it, it's essentially a moral vacuum, which can lead and has led to real-world harm.
And what about something like driverless cars? That's a big one. Many people hope AI will make them safer, maybe removing human error. How does Brian's framework apply there?
Yeah, he elaborates with the example of driverless cars. Could reckoning systems drive safely? His answer is, perhaps. But only if the act of driving itself were as highly regulated and constrained as, say, flying a commercial airplane. In aviation, computers already handle much of the flight, but the environment is meticulously controlled. There are strict protocols for almost every conceivable contingency. That regulation constrains the environment so much that reckoning prowess suffices. The system knows the rules for that controlled world. Brian notes that, at the moment, we don't have driving configured in such a way that reckoning prowess suffices. Our roads are chaotic, unpredictable. If it's not sufficiently regulated, if unexpected circumstances arise that aren't covered by a predefined set of rules, like a child suddenly darting into the street from behind a parked car, then human judgment is still essential. Judgment, with its ethical grounding and its ability to adapt to truly unforeseen variables, is critical. We shouldn't turn driving fully over to AI until either that level of environmental control is achieved, or until the AI somehow possesses judgment, which again, he argues, is impossible for current or foreseen systems. This just underscores that AI's utility is incredibly context-dependent and heavily reliant on the human design parameters of its operation, and crucially, the moral responsibility we embed around it.
Okay, moving beyond just ethical responsibility, Brian Cantwell Smith also raises these profound questions about meaning and language when it comes to AI. The very act of knowing what you're talking about. It seems like AI can produce incredibly human-like text these days, but is it truly meaningful in the way human language is?
That's a central point for him. He argues that just because an AI system can produce a word doesn't imply that it can mean it, a crucial distinction. This is a significant consequence of AI lacking judgment and that true connection to the world. A system's output isn't backed by the fine structure of the world or a commitment to the world. It's just manipulating symbols based on patterns. He references the really disturbing example of an Alexa system responding to a person expressing suicidal thoughts, saying, "I want to jump off a bridge and die." And the system replies something like, "Okay, here are 4 bridges near you." Brian observes, quite rightly, the system has no idea what's going on. It's just matching these things up to data without any grasp of the human suffering, the context, or the ethical imperative involved. It's mimicking language, sometimes convincingly, but not understanding it. The practical relevance here is profound. When you interact with AI, you must always remember it is a reckoning system, not a judging one. Its words lack genuine meaning, intention, or care.
Wow. So the words are there, the grammar might be perfect, but the meaning, the empathy, the true understanding is just
absent, that challenges our very intuition about communication, doesn't it?
It does. Brian suggests that words themselves have ineffable meanings, meanings that go beyond simple definitions. Something poets and translators have grappled with for millennia, right? The subtle nuances, the unspoken context, the cultural baggage. He speculates, for instance, that it may be impossible for a system that doesn't and can't sit to meaningfully utter the word chair. If the word share inherently draws on our bodily capacities for sitting, its affordances, our lived experience of its use, how can a disembodied system truly grasp that? This highlights that deep human meaning is often tied to lived embodied experience, not just abstract data patterns found in text. The Autodesk generative chair example reinforces this beautifully. The AI generates millions of novel chair designs, some quite bizarre. But who decides which is aesthetically best? Which is comfortable? Which is practical? Humans do. Why? Because the AI doesn't sit in a chair. It doesn't learn its meaning in the world through embodied use or cultural context. It only learns chairness or carness through abstract configurations of data points and correlations.
And this idea extends to how we use labels in machine learning too, right? We feed AI data and give it a label like cat, but does the AI understand Pat the way we do? Is it the same thing?
Right. When discussing labels versus words in machine learning, he acknowledges there's an overlap in practice, how we use the terms colloquially. But he insists on a crucial distinction. Labels mean something to us, humans applying them, but not necessarily to the system processing them. Our human ability to mean, to truly understand, relies on what he calls a deferential understanding, deference to the world itself, and deference to experts who know more. Machines like this. He uses the great example of a person who can label subatomic particles fermion, boson, lepton maybe for a physics database, without having any bloody idea what they actually are. They're just following rules, reckoning. They rely on physicists to give those terms true meaning through experiment and theory. The physicist possesses judgment in that domain. Similarly, the AI's computed carness or axalness is based purely on configurations and statistical correlations it finds in data, not on the object's meaning in the world derived through embodiment, use, or genuine understanding of physics or mechanics.
This is truly mind-bending stuff.
Yeah.
So what does this tell us about how we understand the world? What fundamentally distinguishes our intelligence from AI? It sounds like we also simplify things, but maybe we do it in a fundamentally different way.
Exactly. Brian suggests that the world is incomparably rich, vastly more than can be captured in words, and also vastly more than could be finitely represented at all. It's just too much. Our understanding, while undoubtedly less rich than the world itself, is still vastly more complicated than can be articulated, effed in words. Much of it is intuitive, nonverbal. To make sense of this overwhelming reality, to navigate it effectively, we use high-level, coarse-grained concepts and categories, care, tree, happy, sad, for things like recognition, learning, and communication. This allows for what linguists call the infinite use of finite means, the generative power of language, where a finite set of words and rules can create an infinite number of meaningful sentences. We simplify, yes, but we don't completely discard the underlying richness in the process.
And he also challenges a common intuition about how we process information, doesn't he? This idea of a simple two-level system where we just abstract away all the messy details and operate purely at the conceptual level.
Yes, he critiques that idea of a simple two-level system where we just shed all the fine detail at higher levels of abstraction and kind of forget it. He argues that even when we categorize something with a high-level concept like seeing a sofa or identifying a red square in a painting, we don't let go of the fine-grained subconceptual detail. We somehow hold both simultaneously. For example, that red square in a Mondrian painting might have ragged edges. If it were just the idealized geometric concept square, it wouldn't be ragged. Squares are perfect. The fact that we can perceive and describe it as ragged means we're referring to the actual patch of reality, the paint on the canvas that we register or classify as a square, not just the idealized geometric concept itself. This ability to simultaneously handle the abstract category and the concrete, messy instance, this shedding detail without losing it entirely, is essential for learning, generalization, and nuanced understanding. Our minds are doing something incredibly sophisticated here, constantly navigating these multiple levels of abstraction.
That's a really profound observation about human cognition. Can you give us some more everyday examples of this ineffability of human understanding, the things we just know or can do but can't fully articulate?
Oh, he gives several vivid ones. Try to imagine driving blind through rush hour in New York City, relying only on verbal instructions from someone watching a monitor. Utterly impossible, right? So much of driving is subconceptual, intuitive, reacting instantly to constantly changing, unarticulated cues from the environment. Or try distinguishing nutmeg, cinnamon, and allspice purely by smell without using words. You can likely do it if you know the spices, but explaining how you differentiate them in words is almost impossible. The knowledge is in the perception itself. Or his example of a tennis coach giving the useless instruction to hit the ball at the speed of paper coming out of a copier. It's meaningless because the actual skill involves countless micro-adjustments and feelings that defy such simplistic verbal description. These are skills and perceptions that rely heavily on subconceptual, ineffable detail that cannot be fully articulated in language or reduced to a neat set of rules. This ability to navigate multiple levels of abstraction simultaneously, holding both the coarse-grained concept and the fine-grained reality, is a hallmark of human intelligence. It's something bloody impressive, as he says, and we need to understand this better if we hope to construct machines with anything approaching true meaning or understanding. The practical takeaway is that much of our human expertise is built on this intuitive, inarticulable understanding, and that's something current AI simply cannot replicate.
Okay, so if AI can handle these reckoning tasks so powerfully, maybe even better than us in many cases, what does this imply for how we should educate ourselves? And what does it mean to be human in this new era? It really sounds like a call to action for education.
It absolutely is. Brian's clear message is that we should allocate to AIs all the tasks for which their reckoning prowess suffice. And these tasks are legion, he says. AI will be damn good at them, and it would be foolish not to leverage that power. But precisely because AI lacks judgment, we must up the ante on educating people to shoulder the judgment. We need more judgment, not less. He expresses real concern that universities, and perhaps education systems generally, may be doing the opposite, making students more like AI systems and reckoners. He tells the anecdote of the student who asked his English professor, "Professor, how many chapters of this novel do I need to read in order to get an A?" This, Brian implies, is a sign of a focus on reckoning following instructions for a desired outcome, gaming the system rather than engaging in true understanding, critical thinking, and developing genuine judgment about the material.
So it's like we train AI to be the ultimate reckoners, and we should be training ourselves to be the ultimate judges. It's about leveraging technology to elevate human capability, not diminish it or compete on AI's terms.
Precisely. That's the core idea. This suggests a future where humans are potentially freed from many mundane reckoning tasks, rote memorization, complex calculations, simple data processing, freed up to focus on higher-order judgment, ethical decision-making, creativity, critical thinking, and meaning-making, things which are uniquely human capabilities, at least with current and foreseeable technology. He even suggests, quite optimistically, that AI can raise the standards on what it is to be human by taking over these lower-level tasks. It allows humanity the space to lift the human condition up to a higher level. It's a call for us to evolve, to lean into our distinct capabilities, rather than getting stuck trying to compete with machines on their terms at tasks that they will inevitably do better. This is actually a truly optimistic vision for the human future with AI, if we can consciously seize that opportunity and reform our education and values accordingly. Fourthly, beyond technology. Societal and philosophical reflections.
Now, Brian Cantwell Smith's work, as you mentioned, extends far beyond just AI. It touches on the very nature of information itself in the digital age. He seems to challenge our fundamental assumptions about something as seemingly simple as information.
He really does. He challenges our traditional notions of information, noting how digitality, the nature of digital stuff, brings both fixity — you can make perfect identical copies that don't degrade like analog copies — and fluidity. It's incredibly easy to update, revise, and change digital information constantly. This fluidity, he argues, raises complex questions about the very identity of information. When does a constantly updated web page or digital document cease to be the same thing and become something entirely new? It echoes the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus' idea of constant flow. You can never step into the same river twice. Is a constantly updated website ever the same website? He also makes a fascinating point about data. He suggests that big data of the past, the vast treasure trove of information locked away in museums, libraries, and archives, the historical records of human activity, might actually become more crucial for future AI development than the big data of the present, like social media feeds. He sees these historical archives as invaluable treasure in the new data economy, providing the raw material for AI to find deep patterns across vast stretches of human experience and culture. The practical lesson: we really need to rethink how we value, curate, and preserve knowledge, especially historical knowledge, in this constantly shifting digital landscape.
And this notion of fluidity and control over information leads him into a powerful critique of cultural ownership, doesn't it? Which often seems completely at odds with how digital information actually behaves and spreads.
Yes, he highlights a fundamental divide here, and he caricatures it brilliantly as North California versus South California. North California represents Silicon Valley's ethos, at least ideally, a belief in free ideas and free culture, where creativity flows relatively freely, ideas are shared, and innovation happens collaboratively, often jumping between companies. South California, on the other hand, represents Hollywood's traditional model, the belief that culture can be owned, almost like plantation owners controlling property, where strict permission and payment are needed for almost any use or adaptation. He draws an analogy to the 19th century free labor movement, arguing that free culture doesn't mean zero cost or stealing. It means necessary limitations on private rights to enable the maximum flourishing of creativity and innovation for everyone. He sees perfect protection of intellectual property, trying to lock everything down absolutely, as actually inhibiting innovation. He cites the historical debate around the Sony Betamax case as an example. The entertainment industry fought tooth and nail against VCRs, fearing rampant copyright infringement, but VCRs arguably opened up huge new markets. Brian suggests that over-controlling IP ultimately stifles the very creativity it claims to protect.
And he sees a kind of third mode of production emerging now, beyond these traditional models of top-down corporate control or restrictive individual ownership.
Exactly. He discusses this third mode of production, which he calls peer production. We see it everywhere now. It's exemplified by things like academic science, ideally sharing results openly, Wikipedia, a massive encyclopedia built by volunteers, open source software, and even projects like NASA Clickworkers, where thousands of volunteers analyze data. In this model, widely distributed individuals produce valuable information, goods, and services without traditional price signals. They aren't always paid directly, or top-down managerial commands. How is this possible? He points to factors like modularity, tasks can be broken into small pieces, granularity, minimal investment needed from each participant, and low integration costs. Digital tools make it easy to combine contributions from many people. He argues that the traditional incentives argument for perfect control of IP, the idea that people won't create unless they can totally own and profit from it, is dying. Because, as he colorfully puts it, creation, my friends, is Brownian motion. It happens naturally, often collaboratively, driven by intrinsic motivation, reputation, or shared goals. It's a powerful argument for open access and shared knowledge, suggesting that the most salient economic good in this new era isn't just manufactured products, but human capital and collective intelligence. This mode of production already powers so much of our digital world, maybe more than we realize.
Now, turning back to AI specifically, Brian also voices some very serious concerns about its broader societal implications, particularly in terms of surveillance and the potential for ethical misuse. This is where his philosophical insights meet very practical and potentially quite chilling real-world applications.
Yes, he expresses profound worry about the transformation of the physical conditions of human life by pervasive AI systems and how our existing ethical norms might just not apply or be sufficient. He specifically questions the ethical implications of using AI for mass surveillance and the policing of populations. He cites practices emerging in places like China, with social currency systems and ubiquitous facial recognition being used ostensibly to gauge moral character. He dismisses this entire approach as internal behaviorism. It's a misguided attempt, he thinks, to reduce the complexities of human character, thoughts, and intentions down to simple bumping and shoving and electrical measurements, basically, reducing people to observable data points. It's reminiscent of the behaviorist school of psychology, which has largely been discredited as an adequate explanation of human inner life. He argues these policies are fundamentally misconceived because correlation is not the real thing. Just because some external behavior correlates with something we label moral character doesn't mean the AI understands or is measuring actual character or intent. And crucially, such systems lack judgment, lack that commitment to the world, and therefore can never truly understand human meaning, context, or ethical nuance. The practical danger here is starkly clear. Assigning moral judgment to a mere reckoning system can lead to profound injustice, automated discrimination, and a chilling erosion of human freedom and dignity.
Finally, Brian is a philosopher at heart, as we've seen, and his work really engages with some of the deepest questions about consciousness, the nature of reality, and ultimately, what it even means to be a person. He's definitely not afraid to tackle the big ones.
Not at all. He briefly touches on the topic of quantum consciousness, but he's somewhat dismissive. He doesn't think it addresses the fundamental issues of judgment or consciousness itself, seeing it as maybe more popular than deep in philosophical terms. Although, importantly, he acknowledges that quantum computing likely will have a significant impact on deep learning simply by enabling much more powerful calculations. He delves into the reflexive nature of our understanding, pointing out that our theories about technology, our very language used to discuss AI, are themselves concrete, dynamic, communicative symbol systems. Our tools for thinking are part of the world we're thinking about. And he makes this profound assertion. What it is to be a person is in fact a normative agent. Our very personhood, he argues, is defined by our capacity for responsible action and judgment, our ability to make ethical choices and be held accountable for them. This means that our ongoing societal debates about rights and obligations for humans, maybe even for AI someday, will actually shape our future understanding of what information content itself even is. The very identity and meaning of information isn't fixed. It will be determined, in part, by how we assign rights, responsibilities, and liabilities to digital entities and their creators. It's a call to realize we are actively participating in defining our future reality through these debates.
And his ultimate call seems to be for collective effort, almost a rallying cry for humanity as we navigate this new technological age.
Yes, his ultimate call is absolutely for collective effort. We're in this boat together, he states it plainly. He believes we urgently need to forge foundational ideas that will summon a world worth wanting. We need a positive vision grounded in deep understanding. He advocates passionately for things like free bandwidth, free men, free minds, essentially, open access to information, and the freedom to think critically as essential tools to fight against what he sees as unjust, traditional power relations that often support ignorance and uphold unnecessary exclusion. He believes this is a fight for understanding and judgment that will eventually be won. Why? Because in the end, he suggests, it will just be them and us, the forces favoring openness and judgment versus those favoring control and ignorance. And he believes the power of shared ideas and collective human judgment will ultimately prevail over systems based purely on coercion and control. It's a deeply hopeful, yet simultaneously challenging, vision for our future with AI. It demands our active engagement, our critical thinking, and our commitment to judgment.
So as we bring this deep dive to a close, what really stands out for me is Brian Cantwell Smith's powerful and I think profoundly important argument. We are developing these AI systems of incredible reckoning prowess, truly capable of feats that were unimaginable just a few years ago. Astounding stuff. But, and it's a huge but, they fundamentally lack judgment, that deep ethical commitment to the world, that ability to discern reality from mere representation, and crucially, to take responsibility for their actions.
And this raises such an important question for all of us, doesn't it? If machines can handle the data processing, the pattern recognition, the reckoning with such astonishing efficiency, then our human imperative is not to try and outreckon them. That's likely a losing battle. Our imperative is to cultivate and protect our unique capacity for judgment. It's about recognizing that profound difference between simply knowing what's going on based on data patterns and truly knowing what you're talking about in the context of the real world. It's really a call to elevate what it means to be human in an AI-driven era, to be freed, potentially, from the tasks of mere reckoning to embrace our higher calling of judgment, ethics, and meaning-making.
And here's where it gets truly thought-provoking, something for you to really mull over. In a world increasingly shaped by algorithms and automation, Brian Cantwell Smith challenges us to consider, if AI can take over all the reckoning, what new higher forms of judgment will you choose to cultivate in your own life, in your work, in your communities? What happens when our digital tools become so incredibly powerful that the greatest responsibility isn't really in what they can do, but in what we choose to do, and fundamentally what we choose to be with them?
Yeah, consider this. If the world really is as messy, as complex, as incomparably rich as Brian describes, and if our own minds are constantly navigating this interplay between coarse concepts and fine-grained reality, how might our everyday interactions, from simple conversations to major life decisions, be transformed if we consciously tried to embrace the ineffable meanings, in our words, the stuff that goes beyond literal definitions? And if we truly tried to defer to the richness of reality itself, over-relying solely on simplified models or representations? Maybe true understanding isn't about perfectly categorizing everything, but about accepting the inherent mess and learning to navigate it with profound, ethically grounded judgment.
So in an era of unprecedented information access and incredible AI power, the question Brian Cantwell Smith leaves us with is this: will you strive to be a mere reckoner of facts, however skilled? Or will you aspire to be a person of profound judgment, deeply committed to the world and to other people as they truly are? That's the challenge and perhaps the promise he lays before us.